We're going to get started with our final webinar of the day. We'll be talking about local government housing tools for the Marquette County Housing Solutions Summit. I am going to introduce our panelists in just a moment, but before I do, I want to just take a few moments to talk about some of the questions that have come up regarding the Intergovernmental Housing Task Force, and just wanted to introduce that group before we get into the discussion. This summer, there were a few local governments that got together to talk about some of the issues that we're experiencing around housing and how local governments might be able to play a role. I think you've heard me say, and I think you heard it in Anne's presentation this afternoon a few times, a lot of decisions and a lot of action really needs to happen at the local level if we're going to address our housing needs. And I think we're fortunate in Marquette County in that a lot of our local leadership really recognizes that. So we had some governments get together to talk about how we might be able to work together in order to address housing issues in Marquette County. And that group has met a few times at this point. And in our discussions, we talked a lot about what areas we actually needed to impact, and understood that we would be more effective, or the group would be more effective, if it was official, you could say. So there was the resolution that the group put together, and several communities signed on to that. City of Ishpeming, Negaunee, City of Marquette, Marquette County, and the Land Bank Authority all officially joined the Intergovernmental Housing Task Force as participants, with a resolution essentially stating that that group was going to work together to advocate for state resources, identify regional solutions, and examine best practices, and leverage funding opportunities. So we're still working together. All of those units of government are here today, along with Marquette Township, who's also been participating in those conversations. And I guess I should say that the conversations that the group has had and will continue to have are not exclusive. You don't have to sign the resolution to participate. We really want to see as many local governments be a part of the discussions as possible. But we do have a resolution if your community is interested in officially signing on for some of the purposes of advocacy and collaboration. So with that, I will introduce our local government housing panel. We have Nate Heffron, the city manager from Negaunee, Craig Cugini from the City of Ishpeming, city manager, Jason McCarthy, the planner from Marquette Township, and Sean Hobbins from the City of Marquette. I have asked each of them to talk for a few minutes about what they are doing or what they're considering to address housing needs in their community. So they'll each talk about one particular technique that they've explored or that they've applied. And once we get through some of those explanations, we'll get into some questions on how local governments can and should participate in housing needs. So we will start with Nate from Negaunee. Welcome, Nate. And if you could tell us a little bit about yourself in Negaunee and how you are playing a part in housing solutions.
Sure. Thank you very much, Sarah. And thank you for everyone here and the LSCP for putting this together, along with our Intergovernmental Housing Task Force. I'm Nate Heffron, city manager of the City of Negaunee. We're working hard up here to find ways to leverage tools that we have in order to get housing in Negaunee. One of the things that you may have seen in the news today is we had a public auction of 3 lots of land connected to a development agreement where a housing developer has purchased those lots for $7,500 altogether, and they have 5 years to develop those properties. It'll produce 4 housing units, 2 single housing, and 1 multifamily. So first off, some people might say, well, why are you giving away that land? Well, right now, to me, the land is worthless because it doesn't generate tax revenue. In order for our community to grow in Negaunee, we have to have more tax revenue. So we decided that we would start out by selling some properties a lower average cost in order to decrease the overall burden to a developer. And I'm sure everybody knows here, costs of land, the cost of material, shortage of workers, and the short time we have to construct here in the Upper Peninsula. We have to find a way, in my opinion, to decrease those costs overall to make it more appealing for somebody to develop housing up here. Now, whether that housing will be affordable, that's a question. We do know that the developer who purchased these properties understands there's a price point up here, and they're only going to be able to go so far. And in my conversations with this developer and others, it appears that if the developer is building the home themselves, they can price that out a lot better than if they're building a spec house for somebody. So it's an interesting thing to see. We're hopeful they have to build the first house in 18 months. And if they do not build the homes, the property reverts back to the city, and we hold on to the cash and we keep that cash that they paid for, and we can go through the process again. So we're going to be using this technique quite a bit to try to entice developers in our area. We also have I'm not going to get into details, but we are trying to work with the Land Bank Authority here with Ann on some other project that we have up our sleeve right now, but we're working out the details on that. And in addition to that, we have other developers in the area that have bought private properties that are looking at creating some type of housing development, and we're getting into that process as well. So Negaunee appears to be the next location for a lot of housing to happen, but we're here as a partner. We want to work with everybody, and we'll just see how it goes. So that's what's going on in Negaunee.
I'm on mute. Thank you, Nate. That's really exciting, and I think it's a really good model. A lot of the successful housing projects that I've seen kind of start with the land. So that's a great step. Next, we'll go to Craig from the city of Ishpeming.
Hi, good afternoon, and I'm happy to be participating with everyone here today. But I don't think there's any great solution to any. There's no magic wand and there's no crystal ball for how to solve things. And so Ishpeming's taking the approach of try everything, try it twice, and the third time, if it fails, try again. So we don't limit or restrict ourselves in any manner. Ann Giroux has highlighted one of our projects, and while it's a beautiful house, and she showed that it was a home that can demonstrate its possibilities, we did take a loss. And what I think she might have missed in showing there too is the garage came with the lot. So there wasn't a build of that garage. So when we sold that lot, that house that was done as a Mishta mod home, it was a new construction of a home on a lot with an already existing garage, and we still took a loss. So challenges in market conditions really are a struggle for Ishpeming right now. We are a very old town. We are a very old infrastructure, and that includes above ground and below ground infrastructure. So we're also, in addition to the housing, working to fix the below ground infrastructure so that water and sewer do not become a problem for a homeowner that buys a home and then has to put money and invest in a house to be rehabbed or just maintained. We focus on that, but we do have some programs. We have 3 neighborhood enterprise zones, which are similar to Ann's description of how the TIF might work in giving tax incentive. That tax incentive is to the private investor that builds a home in the area. They can apply for tax incentives, and again, having a vacant lot versus having a home with a lot, the tax benefit long term are greater for the city. So we consider foregoing some taxes over a period of time to encourage the development. So that helps out a little bit. I think we've only done maybe 2 or 3 applications for an NEZ since I've been here for 2 years. We work with Land Bank, we work with the county treasurer on properly foreclosing on properties and deciding value of properties and which ones should be auctioned, which ones should be maintained, which ones should be processed with Land Bank, so that Land Bank can help us with those opportunities and described. And then we have a new registration in the National Registry of Historic Districts. And so our downtown area is supported by some additional state opportunities. Specifically our downtown Main Street. There's some facilities there that are available where if they do a multi-use kind of property development, where the first floor is retail and the subsequent floors above are residential, they can get quite a few deals as a developer to develop that property. And we have a blight committee where we're analyzing what we might be able to do to remove some of the homes that are, I guess, really blighted is a soft term, but we have Land Bank will help us with demo. We're looking at training some of our DPW folks in the past. The DPW has even helped with demo. So if we can do some cost savings there, we're looking at availability of ARPA dollars and how they might be incorporated into the process of demolition of some blight to create that space. I think most of the time when we find a open space in Ishpeming, people want it immediately for parking lots because we're short on parking. And so we have to really strategically think about whether or not that lot should be developed into a new home or housing opportunity, or whether it's serving a better purpose as a parking area for some of our apartments that don't have parking. Now all of a sudden they can meet the zoning criteria that requires the 2 parking spaces per apartment, which brings us to zoning considerations. We've had a couple of units in the recent past that developed downtown areas that should have been retail, but a developer wanted to turn some of that into some available housing opportunity and renovate the entire structure with new apartments, but also putting apartments into a retail area, which our zoning does not allow. And the MEDC does not encourage and would take away from opportunities for development funding. But we've done some creative zoning and zoning considerations where we will work with the developer to allow it, because it's better to have a building with housing than it is to have a vacant building in a downtown area. The challenge then is, at some point you still need retail in your retail facilities. You can't just turn everything into housing in a downtown and not have parking. So we struggle every day because every decision has some other decision that follows, or even multiple decisions that follow. But we don't take anything off the plate until it's just ruled out completely as a not viable solution. But if you're a developer out there or a real estate person that is trying to understand what's available, this is a great opportunity to learn some of that. But I encourage each of you to talk to the zoning administrators in our cities, and even the city manager when you get on their calendars, to understand what might be available and take advantage of those things. There's a lot of community partners for shared costs on things. We've even had people move into houses and find that they can get discounts and rebates on their water. So you can find somebody that's in the lower bracket of our income range that might find some incentives. It's not just housing, but it's also utilities that helps them get into the market and go from being a renter to being home ownership. which really helps them with their overall capital investment for themselves personally. So we will share everything that we think is available and help anyone that is looking for help. But programs change on basically a daily basis. So you really have to ask, even when you're, once we're done with this meeting, something will have changed probably. And you'll want to know what's changed. And we usually have somebody that can help you with understanding that change.
Thank you, Craig. I think it's great the city's being responsive that way. And also think it's a great reminder that we don't have just one type of housing issue. We have multiple housing needs, including for rehab. And it's great to hear what Ishpeming is doing to work on some of those issues. So thank you. Sean, you'd like to share what the city of Marquette has been discussing?
Yeah. Well, we have a lot we've been discussing. I think I'll get into the ad hoc housing committee report and their recommendations a little bit later into this. But the two techniques that we've utilized to a good degree of success and will probably continue to utilize, if not necessarily for that lower income, middle income range of housing, but just to increase the housing stock, would be local development agreements and brownfield redevelopment plans. In terms of local development agreements, basically a developer would come to the city, identify a need in the one we implemented and one that's upcoming for the city commission to first hear on about in a work session and then vote on at the second meeting in December. It mainly involves utility upgrades. There's a site that's underserved by water and sewer service, and in exchange for the city bumping up that replacement on its capital improvement plan, the developer would guarantee a certain amount of investment. So what it does is it gives a payback on our investment into the infrastructure within a certain amount of time, much like a brownfield plan would, but there's not a specific capture for it. So basically, we spend $2 million putting in water or sewer to serve a property. The developer guarantees at least $5 million investment within the first 2 years, maybe a second phase of investment after that. The taxable value increases significantly, and therefore the taxes that we collect increase significantly. And within a certain amount of time, that development and our investment into that development pays for itself. So you can see this at the Harbor Vista Apartments on the south side of Marquette. That site was a former hotel. It did not have the services needed to support the development, the housing development that took place there. And we were able to come to an agreement where we upgraded those services, and it paid back in spades. Viridia put in a significant amount of investment in that, more than they even promised to. And they're looking to replicate that again with the development they're calling Hemlock in the Heartwood Forest, the corner of Division and McClellan. So local development agreements are a nice way of supporting development without having to get into tax capture, which leads me into brownfield funding. I can talk about brownfield funding all day, but I'm not sure how familiar everyone is. So basically, you have a piece of property, it has some sort of deficiency, it's blighted, it's obsolete, it's historical, it's owned by a land bank, and there's just a gap in what the developer wants to do and whether or not it's financially viable. So a TIF is put in place, tax incremental financing, where the initial taxable value is frozen, and that continues to go to all the normal taxing entities. And then for the life of the brownfield plan, the increase in taxable value is captured to pay back eligible expenses. One place you can see this is Founders Landing. There's a significant amount of environmental contamination in that area, and there's a lot more than just housing on that property, but the condos, Marquette 1 and 2, those have all utilized brownfield funding to be developed, significantly adding to the housing stock in Marquette. And believe it or not, it's not just for people out of town. At least half are local residents or people who, sold their old home and moved into those developments. And I'm sure we're going to be using, like I said, we're going to be using local development agreements in the future with the Hemlock development. I'm sure we're going to be using brownfield to support housing developments, probably at the site of the old Marquette General Hospital and at the Cliffstow site along the lake. So those are two just tools that we have that we've used to a good measure of success.
Those are two big ones, Sean. Thank you for going through those. I know we talked a little bit about this with Ann's presentation in the last webinar, but some of those bigger properties can be really difficult to develop, and having tools like brownfield is really important. Jason, would you like to share some of the township's housing discussions?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to be here. Township's a little bit different statutorily in that we're not really able to offer tax abatements, and I think TIF districts in some capacity are a thing of the past when involving the schools and the county. So I think they're a little bit more challenging for us than they have been in years past. So we have a philosophy of trying to provide work opportunities and housing opportunities for all stages of life. And anywhere from maybe your first job at one of the larger box stores, or maybe you get into something high tech with 906 engineering, et cetera. To go along with that, I think our most powerful tool is probably zoning. And we, when the new hospital came into the community, we discussed a potential influx of residents, and our township has grown since the 2010 census. So we grew about 6% between 2010 and 2020. What I guess I want to say is that we're zoned properly. So we have vacant land that is zoned for residential development. We also have the ability to have mixed use development. So if you have a permitted commercial use in a commercial district, you can have a residence as part of that permitted use. And one thing that I think we'll start talking about in the future is going back to some of our residential zoning districts that were, typically single family, our platted area, let's say Trowbridge Park, and maybe allowing multifamily or duplexes in those types of districts, because typically right now it's very single family only. And I think if there's properties that we have that could be accessible, there's properties that are inaccessible, the right of way is there, but it's just undeveloped. So that's one way. We have allowed short-term rentals, tiny homes by permitted use. And I don't know, I guess TikTok was one of my guilty pleasures during the lockdown. And, there's people building gorgeous homes out of shipping containers. Those kind of geodesic domes, things like that, we've had some conversations with county building department. And if you're really truly trying to allow housing for all stages of life, then I think we also have to introduce those types of structures as being permitted in our area. So we're working on that kind of thing. Renewable energy it used to be a pretty popular word, but I think maybe even more importantly, if you're trying to have workforce housing or I guess lower income housing, to incentivize those types of things. So rooftop solar, things that can help bring the cost down and somehow incentivize development and bring it down to a lower price point. So I know that those are investments that would need to be made by the developer, but in the end, if the costs were able to be cash flowed differently with different incentives, then that would be one way to look at it too. So yeah, I mean, I can answer any questions that anybody has, but I've been with the township for 10 years, and we've done some pretty aggressive things zoning wise since my tenure. And we're fortunate in that we have a very, I wouldn't say agreeable all the time, but a progressive planning commission and a progressive township board of trustees. And they support staff's work and collaborations like this one. And hopefully we keep that moving forward.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate all that. I think zoning is kind of where a lot of these discussions start. If you don't have the zoning, like Ann said in her presentation about land bank authorities, it's really hard to do anything else with some of those bigger development opportunities like you have in Marquette Township. And I think it is really important that we consider all stages of life as we're planning for these housing needs, and know that we need different types of housing for different stages of life. So it's, I think that's a great perspective that we need to zone accordingly. So I have a few questions for each of the panelists to kind of kick off some of the discussion. But I'll start with Sean with a question about why your Planning Commission and elected board decided to make changes and take action on housing as an issue to be involved in.
Sure. Yeah, housing affordability is something that's been in our master plan for a while, but we've had a couple of city commissioners who have been elected in the past few years who have included housing as part of their platform. Whether it was inspired by personal experience in the housing market or by interactions with residents while they were campaigning, or just because they recognized that, as a community that has a lot of renters, has a rising amount of home costs, that it's just becoming more of an issue. In January 2021, Mayor Jenna Smith requested the establishment of the Ad Hoc Housing Committee in order to better understand the role of the city as it relates to housing affordability. That committee was formed. Sorry, hit the space bar. That committee was formed later in January 2020, and they were tasked with producing a report of findings with recommendations. They held, I think it was something like 15 to 20 meetings. They interviewed a lot of housing developers, people who are prominent in the housing market in Marquette, people with a lot of insight into affordable development, transitional housing, student housing, and they were able to come up with a report that included 5 major categories of recommendations. And I encourage everyone to read that. I know it was discussed, I think, at the last housing meeting the LSCP held, but it's on our website, and it includes 5 main categories of recommendations: defining the role of the city in housing, reviewing and updating city policies and code, and that goes back to a lot of the planning zoning code that we have, seeking partnerships, community engagement, and then it gives a variety of strategies for implementation. The city commission voted to approve all those recommendations at a meeting last month. So staff, a lot of action items are already in progress, and others are currently being worked on. We, I think really saw a need for at least a discussion on affordable housing in this community, and we're really engaged in having that right now.
Okay, thank you, Sean. I know that ad hoc committee report has been really helpful, and I think a really good example of how local governments can be proactive and deliberate about how they address this. I have a question for Craig on what the biggest needs are in terms of resources or community support for local governments to be effective in addressing housing issues. What are some of the gaps that we face as we try locally to address housing?
And I think as you review the results that were presented by Ann Drew and Ryan Susi, those 2 presentations really hit what's going on in our community on the West End. We have some of the lower income families and some of the highest costs to build in the area. And so when you try to construct and you're above the market condition and you have a demographic that needs housing that can't afford the market condition, you end up with these gaps. And so we try to work through those gaps in so many different ways. But just to capture a couple of things, 18% of residents are under 18, 21 are over 65, 14% almost 15% live below or at poverty level. So we've got these demographics working against us, plus market conditions working against us. And 46% of our residents are considered asset limited, income restrained, employed. So that really tells you the tale of why we're probably some of the most blighted housing. Is the people that can afford to be in a house can't afford to put any market or money into their house to even maintain, let alone improve on housing. So we have that as a challenge. And then building new, what's been kind of funny to watch over the last year is how the housing market's gone kind of crazy throughout the world, but we're experiencing it in Marquette County. As Marquette County's selling all their housing, people are moving to Negaunee, and as people are filling up the housing in Negaunee, they're starting to move into Ishpeming. So even houses that have been challenged for so many reasons on our market are being filled and or sold. And so I think that's been driving a lot of landlords to doing some renovations of some of the apartments. We had a recent fire in one of our apartment buildings where I think 10 units were sort of destroyed. And so that housing is going to be all renovated through insurance claim and money. But we are working at the lowest of the lowest income level with the highest market condition costs. And then you add in the challenges of market, driving supply costs, the lack of tradespeople, all of those things work against us. So we have to find creative solutions. Nate's creative solution of how he's marketing his land and trying to use that maybe a platform for Ishpeming, working with land bank, working with folks to get them tax breaks, getting our historical registration. All of those things are tools that give us flexibility, but the reality is it's still going to take something new, which is probably some revenue. It's probably going to be some education on getting tradespeople at right out of high school, getting into education and training for bringing trades in, as well as we have a new housing complex that opened up this summer for seniors. There's an apartment complex. So we already talked about folks that are in that senior category downsizing out of housing and moving into apartments. So the new stuff is being occupied by the oldest residents, and then those houses become available. So there's this real market shifting going on, and trying to understand it and be ahead of it is very difficult. But we are doing everything we can to try to understand that, working with any partners that we can to understand it. We work with Invest UP. I think Amy's sitting on the attendee list, but Invest UP helps us to find some developers in the area. We work with partners like LSCP here today, and then this intergovernmental consortium that we're working on right now is collaboration of ideas. Like no one town has any great idea that can't be used in another town. So information sharing, idea sharing, collaboration, and so all of those things are what we're coming together. And I guess the final thing is what Sean hinted at is the using zoning in the end is going to also help. That's a tool to shape the community. And I guess Jason even said it, is that you shape your community in a way that it gives the community flexibility to support those that want to develop. Finding new ways to shape that. We've been doing some conditional use zoning. We've been doing some rezoning. I mean, Ishpeming, everybody knows that there's a cognition matter in war in Ishpeming, not news, but cognition is moving into an old church. And so that takes us rezoning of sorts in order to make a business thrive again. And so we look at that as an opportunity to create a new environment, a new way of doing business, so that the business thrives and it brings people back into town that want things. So I don't know. There's no one great way, but there's definitely a myriad of opportunities that can be meshed together. And as you mesh those ideas together, you're going to create a solution or multiple solutions. And it takes everybody in this community that's on this screen, whether you're an attendee or whether you're a panelist, everyone's involvement in making these things happen.
That's really true. Thank you, Craig, for that point. I think you're right. We do have a lot of opportunities right now. Some of the things that you talked about as being resource gaps, essentially, for addressing this need. We hope we can maybe plug some of those holes with the bills and the funding proposals that are out there at the state level right now. But we know that's not going to be a complete solution. We are, like you said, still going to need all hands on deck and the entire community supporting these initiatives. So thank you for that. Jason, a question for you. What do you see as the biggest opportunity for local governments or Marquette Township to participate in some of these housing initiatives moving forward?
Well, as Craig mentioned, the market is changing, and I do contract zoning for other communities in Marquette County, and a lot of properties that were, available for a long time on the market are now no longer available. So there has been an influx of people, I believe, leaving urban areas and coming up to the UP, or at least wanting to invest in a second home or their camp and things like that. So I think there are some properties that are coming back on the tax roll or performing better than they were in previous years. But mainly just that there's an influx of people, I think, coming into our community. I know the 2020 census wasn't very friendly to some folks, but I'm not sure the accuracy of that. Also, I'm seeing different things that I've been reading on the census data. And so being innovative, recognizing that people are being very creative with their properties right now and what they want to do with them. And that includes, a phone call I get quite a bit is, hey, we want to buy a piece of property. We just want to park our camper on it for a couple of years till we retire. Then we want to build a little cottage. Then we want to add a big pole barn and things like that. So I know it's a popular mantra today, but zoning really is a powerful tool in setting your community up for allowing different things that you can tolerate, not tolerate, but that are smart for your community. Of course, one zoning ordinance for Marquette Township may not be appropriate for a platted city, but just being innovative and recognizing trends and trying to stay ahead of those trends instead of getting piled up behind them. And so I've been trying to educate, the communities that I do work for, to start looking at your zoning ordinances, definitions. A lot of those smaller rural townships do not have the definitions and the land uses in there that they should. So that's the first and foremost thing. So yeah, that would be my answer to that.
Okay, thank you, Jason. I think that's a great first step. I think educating the community and local governments is not always a tangible solution, but I think it's a really necessary one. So great point. Question for Nate. Some of us, I think some of you have already touched on this, but how do you see local governments working together to address housing? What opportunities do you see there?
Sure. So the first thing is, if anybody here that's not on the task force is on this call today, and they're in Marquette County. I encourage you to join. It's free, so you don't have anything to lose, and you have everything to possibly gain. So I'm a regionalist. If you know me, you see that we reach out to folks. We reach out to local governments in our area, and we try to work with them as much as possible. We're the only ones that are going to find the solution. There are state programs out there that are trying to work with us, and there may be federal ones, but they're slow to react. And we can't wait for others to fix our problem. So this task force is the first step, I think, in trying to solve this issue. I brought up the state, for instance, and a story that I have real quick is we tried to join or we tried to get involved in a grant program where it would rehab some housing, but it capped that cost about $7,500. We tried doing this 2 years ago. However, we couldn't find a contractor. It really wasn't clearly stated to us, and it might have been because we were a little naive, or it wasn't told to us clearly. I'm not quite sure, but we didn't end up having, or we didn't end up being able to execute that program and had to give back that grant. That was about $45,000, I believe. We tried to get in that round again, but to me, it feels like the state has a large disconnect in what reality is out there. Timing up in the UP, we have a short construction season, and we do not have the same resources as in contractors that can take on these jobs if we want to use those funds for rehab at all. So I think we need to communicate clearly as a group rather than individuals, individual communities, telling the state where they need to revamp their programs or create new programs or authority for local governments to do things. So that's just one example. Other examples, definitely working in the zoning and planning area. We can share our knowledge. We can share our resources to some extent. I think LSCP is starting to dive into that realm a little bit, and then I think they're going to come out with some information potentially in the future. That's all helpful. QPAD is a great resource. So joining other organizations, other communities have joined, working with those organizations, working with the other communities, learning from them. Sean's a great person to learn about brownfields and other things that Marquette has done. They have a lot more resources than most of us. So just sitting down and talking to each other and learning from each other is going to go a long ways. And I think that's what this task force is going to do. Other things that I feel that will be helpful is we have a long ways to go to find good methods to educate not only the public in what the housing capabilities of government is, but what the property rights of individuals are as well. Developers are not mandated to build affordable housing. They're going to build, but they're going to build to make their money back and make it profitable for them. However, we have an opportunity to leverage city or community-owned properties to potentially have some mix in there where they have to provide some element of affordable housing, however we want to do that. In addition to that, we have to also educate our boards and our councils, and we can work together in doing that with one voice rather than 7 or 8 or 12 voices going around the county trying to make their case. So that's where I feel we have our greatest opportunities. Of course, there are others, financially, but those are some questions and conversations we still have to have down the road before we go down that.
Okay, thank you, Nate. A lot of good points there, and I think some of your responses get to one of the questions in the chat here about how we can help as a community on this issue. And then one issue that we haven't really talked about a lot is how we can change the sometimes negative community reaction that we see with the changes taking place or proposed. Anybody want to take a stab at that?
So East Swimming is partnering with LSCP, and the council's just approved an agreement that we're working out the details, but they're going to help us with some of our marketing strategy as part of that communication piece. And that a small government doesn't have a lot of resources, and I certainly don't have the resources to hire a communication person or publicist, and so it gets really challenging sometimes to not just focus as a small community on answering complaints, but to be in front of that strategy and answer and provide ideas, provide what's coming, have dialogue and survey community needs and do a needs assessment and understanding community when you're basically chasing your tail on a small staff kind of operation. So we'll be looking to grow our communication strategy through our new partnership with LSCP as we go. And I think that that is going to help us to get in front of it initially. I think communication is always key, as it's your biggest challenge, but it's also a greatest asset opportunity. So our council and Ishpeming recognizes that challenge, and we're going to try to figure out how to get after that. I don't think there's, again, I don't think there's any quick answer to the things that we're talking about today, but at least understanding that that problem exists before people raise it to you as a specific problem is trying to be forward thinking and getting after it. And so that's one strategy from our perspective is we want to communicate, but limited resources impact us in so many different ways. And that's one of the resource issues for the issue.
Thank you, Craig. We're really excited about the opportunity to help with that. And we, like Craig said, are working on an agreement where we'll be able to be a little bit more proactive on proposals and initiatives that the city is working on. And I agree with Craig. I think that that's key to changing, I guess, the knee-jerk reaction to some of these projects or ideas when people are informed about what's happening and informed about the process and the techniques. It's sometimes easier to get public support because there's a more complete understanding and I guess less opportunity for rumor to fill in some of the gaps, I might say, in information. So that's, I think that's one approach. And then having conversations like this at the community level regularly, I think is also going to be really important so that people understand what the needs are, who's being affected by this issue and who needs to be a part of the solution. So I think the negative reaction that's referred to in the question is a really difficult challenge to overcome. And it's something that we can really only address in an ongoing way with regular community dialogue. Does anyone else want to try to answer that question?
No, it's something that I feel like we deal with a lot. Communities are very resistant to change, and big moves mean big change. I think it's worth communicating with your community and seeing, is the reaction really negative or is it just the same couple detractors? What sift through and really find what people are trying to say about the development and make sure when you bring things up, you're really solid on why you're doing this, how it aligns with your community master plan, how it aligns with your strategic goals, and what the impact is going to be. Show the good in the project and be optimistic and positive, just to counteract the instant negativity. Because it can be a little disheartening, when you work on a project for a really long time and all of a sudden you put it out on social media and everybody is very opposed to it immediately. You just kind of got to stick through and really show why this fits, why this is a good project, and how it's going to benefit everybody.
Thank you.
Sarah, I just want to add that I also think that, that's something we're probably going to discuss in our task force to some degree. What is the political will first of these boards? There might be a great project out there, and maybe Marquette doesn't want to do it. Maybe Ishpeming doesn't want to do it, but it fits better in Negaunee, or so on and so forth in another community or whatever. I think we need to take that poll a little bit, see where we lie, because bringing a project that's to be dead on arrival is just going to waste everybody's time. I can tell you that there's nothing that would upset me more, using civil language here. If I spent a lot of time putting a project together, a development, bringing it to my council, and then it being shot down. It wastes the time of developers, it costs money, wastes the time of staff, that costs money. And so we gotta see what our boards are looking at. You can't have it both ways. You can't say you need housing, affordable housing, but not allow the housing to be built. So there's a disconnect in that. We got to figure out where that disconnect is. And, you know, and having conversations with some city managers and township managers in my circle, to be honest, in most cases, we don't care where that housing shows up. Yes, we'd love to have it in our communities to help grow our tax base, but those houses in our community in Marquette County are going to allow for workers to be here and grow our population, and it's going to only benefit the entire county. So that's my train of thought. I'm hoping that's what the train of thought of other folks in our task force will be as well. But that's another thing I just bring up when it comes to you know, community education and political will.
Okay, thank you. We have a question on, let me go back up here, on specifics on Ishpeming and Negaunee in the housing market there. How did the closure of the Empire Mine affect the housing market? And we have about 10 more minutes left in the panel. Just a time reminder.
I'm gonna defer
Nader,
to Nate because I
Craig.
wasn't here when that happened, but hopefully Nate was able to address that in some way.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear Craig. Did he defer to me?
Craig
Yes.
deferred to Nate, yes.
Oh, okay. I couldn't quite hear you there. Well, from my perspective coming in, I'm just going to say that I feel Negaunee weathered the storm a little bit better. And just to put everything out there, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it, we have a better housing stock than Ishpeming. We know this to be a fact. There's a lot of vacant homes. There's homes that need rehab. There's potential homes that need to be torn down. And we have a few homes like that in Negaunee as well. So overall, I feel like the housing market was hit the hardest in Ishpeming. You can see that, like I said, with the vacancy, the decreased value in those homes as well, and just the state of those homes. So there is some work and great potential, I believe, in Ishpeming to recap and recover. It's just we got to have a strategy and help Craig out, help out the people of Ishpeming and try to make that realization come true. It's going to be costly, but housing costs money, and we're not going to get it for free. So we got to figure out where we're going to go from here and take our best options and just kind of see where it goes.
Okay, thank you, Nate. There's a question here about the effect of affordable housing or multifamily housing and bringing in and keeping working age demographics in relation to boosting economic development. For a worker making $13 an hour, rent of $1,000 a month is against them. I guess I would concur with that. It makes it really difficult for a lot of people to find a place that they can afford. I don't know if anyone on the panel would like to comment on that, but it is a key element of our economic development discussions over the last few years is making sure that we have housing for that demographic.
I will tell you that the folks working on apartments in Ishpeming are not targeting $1,000 a month. They're trying to stay well below that. I think it's got a lot to do with our stock, as Nathan was saying, that the values of stock in Ishpeming don't warrant those higher prices. So we find some of those folks moving to Ishpeming. The problem is there's not a lot of stock available, as Ryan was pointing out in his presentation. And then again, we just lost a 10 unit or better apartment complex to a fire. So as you have low stock, the demand also drives those investors to higher prices because they know they can get it, and they don't necessarily consider the demographics as much as they consider their wallets. And so trying to work with those investors and having quality houses, quality apartments available without overcharging, without overgouging these folks. I think this is one of the areas of opportunity for Ishpeming because of our current demographics already driving those prices down a little bit as compared to some of the eastern side of town.
Thank you, Craig. Sean, did you have something to add? I saw you took yourself off.
Yeah, just, you know, I think we all want to see housing that hits that price point. It's just so difficult to, you know, find people who are willing to develop at that level just because they, you know, a developer's job is to make money at the end of the day. And without direct subsidy, I don't know how in this market you create housing that hits that price point. You know, our businesses in the community definitely need workers, and that's probably what you make in the hospitality industry. We see a need for it, but solving the problem is, you know, why we're all talking and working together right now.
It's very true. Okay, I don't know that we have more questions, but there's a comment here on the education and communication piece that sharing information with local news sources when things are coming up can help get ahead of the negative or quick reaction within the community. I think that's a great point. And I was really glad to see there's some media participating in the housing summit today and tomorrow. So I'm really glad to have them be a part of the solution on this. One of the things I wanted to mention also related to education and communication is there is a guidebook for local governments coming out in the next few months. In addition to the Land Bank Authority how-to that we talked about earlier, the Michigan Association of Planning is putting together essentially a housing development process guide for local governments. So we will share more information about that when it's available, but I think that will have some really good information for local governments that are trying to get educated on this. So before we wrap up, any final comments from the panel? Any of the issues we touched on today? Okay, for all of,
I'm sorry, I would like to just comment on the news. I think that, well, I know for sure that everyone on this panel has our media sources as a partner. I have a list that we email regularly with press releases and advisories, and we agree with the comment that they are part of our communication strategy and they can be leveraged to help us share a message. And we do thank the media partners out there that support us in telling our story on a regular basis.
okay. Thanks, Craig.